Hey guys, Rob here from Rob and Loz. What I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be doing a video log of my progress at an event. I'm going to be taking part in the World Magic Cup Qualifiers, or WMCQ for short. It's going to be a big event, it's going to be a serious event, but it's going to be a fun one. I'm going to try and get myself a few interviews with my opponents as well, just to see how everything went. So, without further ado, let's get to the party! Okay, so it's time to explain to you exactly what I'm going to be playing in the event today. I'm going to be playing a Kiki chord list using Eldritch Evolution. So that's the new card that's been released in Eldritch Moon, which basically just does the job of the old birthing pod, sort of. Not very well, but it is a good replacement. So I'll explain what cards I'm using today. So kick things off, I've got 4 Birds of Paradise. So they're going to be helping out with the mana, because 1-drop mana dorks are amazing. I'm also going to be using 2 Noble Hierarchs, which is another really powerful and really efficient mana dork. But it also has Exalted, which means I can attack with a single creature and it gets bigger. So that's those creatures. I'm going to be using 1 copy of Spellskite. So that one is very good against the Infect and the Boggles decks, because they can't really target their own creatures with their pump spells while the Spellskite's on the field, because I can just have it redirected to the Spellskite. That's very efficient. The next card I'm going to be talking about is a new one from Eldritch Moon called Selfless Spirit. So this thing is basically just there to protect me from board wipes and sweepers, because it gives my entire team indestructible. It's also a very, very cheap creature that's very efficient. It's a 2/1 flyer, so I can continue attacking with it a whole bunch as well. Next up, I'm going to be talking about my 3 Voice of Resurgence. Now, Eldritch Evolution requires you to sacrifice a creature, and what better creature to sacrifice than one that gives you a creature again? Voice of Resurgence is also incredibly powerful against the control decks, because it means that they can't use spells during my turn without giving me creatures. So, very, very powerful effect there. The next one I'm going to be talking about is Scavenging Ooze. Now, Scavenging Ooze is very, very powerful against the graveyard decks, because I can just start eating up a bunch of their cards out of their graveyard. If I happen to eat a few creatures as well, all the better, because I gain life out of it, and Scavenging Ooze also gets bigger. Very, very strong. The next one I'm going to be talking about is Qasali Pridemage. Now, Qasali Pridemage is just a really efficient creature. 2 mana 2/2 with Exalted. It also lets me blow up an artifact or enchantment, so very, very cool effect there, especially against decks that rely on artifacts or enchantments as their base level win conditions. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Aven Mind Sensor. Now, this is a little bit of a spicy piece of tech that I've added to the deck myself. The reason why I've got that in here is because the big weakness of this deck is things that search their library for their powerful cards, like big mana decks like Tron, Green-Red Valakut, and stuff like that. The ability to search the deck for those decks is incredibly important, so they can put together their pieces. Even Mind Center basically shuts that down. It just means that all it says is that means they can only search the top 4 cards of their library if they were going to search their library. It's also very efficient against things like fetch lands, which I'll start talking about in a moment. Next up is probably one of the best 3-drops in the format, Kitchen Finks. Again, another great sacrifice target for Eldritch Evolution. Also, a 3 mana 3/2 that gives me 2 life upon entry, but can come back straight away. So, very, very, very powerful creature, very efficient. And it does a lot of work in this deck. Next up is Orzhov Pontiff. Now, this little guy here can either pump my field when it comes into play, or it can reduce the size of my opponent's field by -1/-1. This guy is basically here to deal with Infect decks, because most of their creatures start off as 1/1s, and they just get bigger from there. They can't really do much besides, so if they're all going to be just 1/1s, then Orzhov Pontiff will kill a whole bunch of them in one swing. Very, very powerful. Next card I'm going to be talking about is Anafenza the Foremost. Now, this guy is actually really cool. It's a 3-mana 4/4 for starters. That's very powerful. But if a creature would enter an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it gets exiled instead. So it means that graveyard decks don't really have a great deal of options anymore while Anafenza is on the field, because the entire goal for them is to fill their graveyard. If they can't fill their graveyard with creatures, that's going to shut down their game very quickly. Next up, I'm going to be talking about the 2 copies of Eternal Witness in the deck. Now, these guys are just really good gas. I can use them to cast Court of Calling for free in effectiveness, because I just go Court of Calling for 3, get the Eternal Witness, and get back the Court of Calling, so I've just gained a creature for nothing at instant speed. It also lets me go get anything that's died over the turn, or any spell that I just desperately need to keep my hands on, or it can just get me a fetch land back that in case I just need to hit my land drops. So, very efficient creature. We're up to the 4-drop slot now, and what I'm going to start off with is an old favorite from Standard, Siege Rhino. So this guy is just a big, beefy beater, and just so efficient. Comes in as a 4/5 with Trample for 4 mana, which is already pure gas. And then when it comes into play, it drains all opponents for 3. So each opponent loses 3 and you gain 3. So very, very efficient. It's a 6-point life swing on a 4/5. Very quick, very efficient. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Avalanche Riders. Now, this guy is once again for the big mana decks. He starts off as a 2/2 with haste that I have to pay for again, but when he comes into play, I blow up a land. It's plain and simple, just that land is gone. Very, very good for the deck. Next up in the 4-drop slot, I'm going to be finally talking about the Restoration Angels. Now, obviously, this is a big part of the combo in the deck. Basically, it's a 3/4 flyer with flash, and when it enters the battlefield, I can flicker a creature. So I exile it and bring it back straight away, as long as it's not an angel. So with all efficiency within the deck, I can flicker Eternal Witness, I can flicker Avalanche Riders. There's a lot of enter the battlefield triggers that are in the deck. I can flicker all of them out, and all of a sudden I've just gained infinite amounts of value out of that. Very, very efficient. Now we're up to the 5-drop slot. I'm going to be talking about Sagada, Host of Herons. Now this creature is an interesting one. 5 mana 5/5 with flying and hexproof. So it can't be targeted, and spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. So this guy I've got in here for the controlling mid-range decks like Jund, Jeskai, Abzan. Very, very good against those decks. It's also really good against Living End, because then Living End can't use the combo to sweep my field while Sagada's in play. Basically, the only real way to get rid of a Sagada is to sweep the board, and because Jund doesn't really run a great deal of those, she just keeps on beating in for 5 every turn. Very, very quick, very efficient way to kill someone there. I'm going to now be talking about Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. Now, this guy is a combination with Restoration Angel, which I'll just show you here. So what I can do is I can tap the Kiki-Jiki like this to make a copy of the Restoration Angel. The copy of the Restoration Angel comes in, and the enter the battlefield trigger targets the Kiki-Jiki. So it flickers out the Kiki-Jiki, brings it back, and it comes back untapped. So, and because it has haste, I can tap to make another copy of Restoration Angel. And I can just keep on doing that until I have effectively an infinite number of creatures in play. It's an instant win on the spot, because you just go to combat and you swing in the face. Very, very, very good. And then basically the main way to win the game in this deck. Next up, I'm going to be talking about another nice little piece of tech here, Revelark. Now, this guy is just fantastic against controlling mid-range decks. What he does, he's a 5 mana 4/3 with flying, but when he leaves the battlefield, I can get 2 creatures with power 2 or less from my graveyard back into play. So if somebody's killed off my Kiki-Jiki, I can bring him back. If somebody's killed off my Avalanche Riders, I can bring that back. I can bring back Voice of Resurgence. I can bring back almost anything that's of relevance in the deck. It's really sweet how Revelark works. And Reveillock is now in combination with the last card I'm going to be talking about, and that is LS Norn, Grand Cenobite. I've had this one signed by LSV. I'm really, really, really fortunate to have met him and gotten him to sign this. What happens is I can use the Eldritch Evolution to sacrifice the Reveillock to go get LS Norn, but because Reveillock leaves the battlefield, I can get 2 creatures back with it. So, in effect, I'm gaining 3 cards at the cost of 1. Very, very sweet. And all of my creatures get larger with LS Norn, and all of my Acronis creatures get much smaller. So it's against the decks that rely on smaller creatures that are pumped, like Infect. LS Norn is a windmill slam. They just cannot deal with LS Norn in this particular case. So that's all the creatures in the deck. What I'm going to be going through next is the spells. So the bread and butter of the deck, really. So I've got what I'm running today. I'm going to be running 3 Path to Exile, just as an all-purpose removal spell. Just that creature is now no longer a problem for me. You can have your basic land, sure, but I'm not going to be dealing with that creature anymore. Very efficient. Next up is the important bit. So I'm going to be running 4 Eldritch Evolutions today. So Eldritch Evolution is a card that makes me sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. However, if the spell resolves, I go to get another creature with a converted mana cost of X or less, where X is the converted mana cost of the creature that I sacrificed plus 2. I can go get anything smaller than that, but the fact that I can get plus 2 means that I can combine the Reveillock and LS Norn combo that you just saw before. So that's a really efficient way to win the game on the spot. Finally, I've got 3 Court of Calling. Now, this card is absolutely fantastic in this deck. Unfortunately, I don't have matching artworks. That's fine. It has Convoke, which means I can tap my creatures to generate mana for the spell. And it lets me search my library for a creature with a converted mana cost X or less and put it into play. And the spell is X and triple green. So it was a really, really efficient way to go get pieces of a combo or just other cards that you need. I mentioned its interaction with Eternal Witness before. It's just absolutely fantastic how it works. This deck is a very greedy deck. It's running as 4 colors, so as such, it's going to need a whole bunch of lands, of course. But the way the lands work is just absolutely strange. So to kick things off with lands, I've got 4 Windswept Heaths. Now, Windswept Heath is a fetch land. It lets me go get a plains or forest. I will explain the interactions with that in a moment and why that's good. I'm also running 4 copies of Wooded Foothills for the same purpose. So that's where we kick things off with the lands. And now I'm going to explain why the fetch lands are so good in this deck. Because of these cards here. The shock lands. Now, all of these cards that I'm just showing you now, they all have basic land types. So, as you can see, the Sacred Foundry taps for red and white, but it's also a mountain plain. So, I can go get that with the fetch lands up here. So, it's a very efficient way to get the mana sources that I need while not skipping out on my colors. So, obviously, this is a 4-color deck, so it's absolutely greedy as all hell. But it is a very efficient deck, so that's why we are running it for today. The next cards I'm going to be talking about are this one here, the Ghost Quarter. Now, this one I use as another way to deal with big mana decks, because I can take them off of a specific source of mana, or I can just take away a piece of Tron. What Tron is I mentioned it a few times in the video. The deck basically requires 3 different lands, and if it has all 3 of them on the battlefield at the same time, those 3 lands tap for a combined 7 mana. So if I can blow one of those up with the Ghost Quarter, they can't get that anymore. Very, very good. I'm using 1 copy of Gavany Township, just as a way to keep, just in case if I need to go down to a beatdown plan, I can use the Gavany Township to just keep my team strong, because it puts a +1/+1 counter on all of my creatures, and as you saw, we've got a lot of creatures. Next up is I'm running a single copy of Razor Verge Thicket, just as another green-white land, because green and white are the most important colors in the deck. And being able to have green or white mana early without sacrificing life is very, very good. So one copy of Razor Verge Thicket in the deck. I am also running one copy of Violet Thicket, just in case I need to hardcast the Kiki Jiki, because I'm only running a few copies of red mana. This is a way for all of my green lands to tap for red mana. A very, very good way to do that as well. Finally, we're just going into the basics. We have 2 forests, a plains, and a swamp. That's what the basic lands look like. Obviously, because we're such a greedy deck, Blood Moon is going to shut down a lot of our lands, but with these cards, we should generally be okay. So that's what we're running as for the main deck. I will just quickly explain the sideboard to you. Now, what a sideboard is, for those that don't play Magic, is you have 15 cards extra in the deck that aren't actually in the deck, but you can swap out in between games just in case you're playing against certain matchups that you're not favored against or you need cards for. So the first thing I'm going to put in is I'm going to talk about Spike Feeder. Now, Spike Feeder is 3 mana 0/0 that comes into play with 2 1/1 counters. I can pay 2 or remove a 1/1 counter to move that 1/1 counter onto another creature, or I can just remove a 1/1 counter to gain 2 life. Doesn't seem all that innocuous, but it is a nice combination with the Archangel of Thune, which is also in my sideboard. Because whenever I gain life, I put a 1/1 counter on all of my creatures. So, I remove a 1/1 counter from the Spike Feeder to gain 2 life, but Archangel says that I put a 1/1 counter on all my creatures whenever I gain life. So I put the 1/1 counter back on the Spike Feeder, and all of my team gets larger. It's nice way to gain infinite life and make my creatures infinitely large. So that basically just says I win the game 9 times out of 10. I have another copy of Selfless Spirit in the sideboard, just in case I am playing against control, because sometimes one just isn't enough. I am running a copy of Pia and Kiran Nala. Basically, this guy is just really sweet. It's 4 mana for a 2/2 that comes in with 2 1/1s. Very, very, very efficient. So basically, I'm paying 4 mana for 3 bodies. It's very difficult for decks like Juns to deal with. I am running a copy of Linvala, Keeper of Silence. Now, Linvala is there for the mirror match, because what she says is that the activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. All of a sudden, all of those really efficient creatures like Kiki Jiki, all of the Mana Dorks, everything else that is just so important to the deck now can no longer be used. So, a great way to just shut that down. I am running a second copy of Aven Mind Sensor in the sideboard, again for the big mana decks, because I've just got so many problems against that deck. I'm running 2 copies of Kataki War's Wage. Now, this one is for the Affinity deck, which is basically just all artifacts. What Kataki says is that all artifacts have, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this artifact unless you pay 1. In a deck full of artifacts, it gets very difficult to pay for everything. So, Kataki basically just shuts that down very quickly. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Deflecting Palm. Now, what this card does is, next time a source of damage would deal damage to me, I prevent that, and if it's prevented in this fashion, I throw that amount of damage back at my opponent. So, against decks like Infect, Boggles, or stuff like that that's trying to go for a single Alpha Strike, I can just Deflecting Palm, prevent the damage, and just throw it straight back at them, which is very efficient in a race. It's also very important to note that this does not target the creature, so I can use it on hexproof targets. Very, very good way to just stop the game on the spot. Another piece for the Infect deck, Malira, Silvok Outcast, basically just says I can't gain poison counters anymore, and my opponent's creatures lose Infect. And again, not all that efficient, all that important, but my creatures can't have -1/-1 counters placed on them. So if my Kitchen Finks dies, for example, and comes back with a Persist, it doesn't gain the -1/-1 counter. So it's basically just an infinite creature then. There is another combo to talk about using that and Viscera Seer, but we are not using that combination in the deck. I've got one copy of Reclamation Sage, who ETBs with destroying targeted artifact or enchantment, which is really, really powerful, especially against decks that rely heavily on artifacts and enchantments. So we're using one copy of that. It's also a nice flicker target with Restoration Angel, so really, really cool there. I'm running another copy of Scavenging Ooze, just again for the graveyard decks, because you can never have enough graveyard hatred. I'm running a copy of Eidolon of Rhetoric, which basically just says each player can't cast more than one spell per turn. Really, really good against the combo decks that rely on the ability to cast multiple spells in a row. So things like Storm, Ad Nauseam, Living End as well, and Restore Balance are very, very, very big proponents of the use of Eidolon of Rhetoric, because it just shuts them down on the spot. The really great thing about Eidolon of Rhetoric as well is that the 4 points of toughness mean it can't die to Lightning Bolt. So very, very, very good there. And finally, I am running 2 copies of Crumble to Dust. Now, this is just another card against the big mana decks, because this deck is actually really weak against those. It basically just says that land is gone. You don't get that land anymore, and you don't get to search for it anymore because I've just taken all of that land out of your deck. It's a great way to just completely shut down Tron, because they just lose one of their pieces altogether, and then they're stuck generating 1 mana like a fair deck should. So, that's all we're going to be talking about for the deck. We'll see you guys in the event. Alright guys, so we went off to a really strong start. We played against Jund in round 1, which is normally a relatively even matchup, depends on whether or not we get combos. Fortunately, we never needed to search for it because a hardcast Elesh Nord would generally do the trick. So we won that one 2-0, and we are up 1-0 to start things off. So bonus, good start. Let's keep this one up and we'll keep on going. Okay, so we're here with Brendan. Here's my round 2 opponent. What are you playing today, Brendan? Affinity. So we had ourselves a pair of extremely close games. How did we all turn out?
Look, I ended up with a game loss, a close game 2. I took a very interactive hand with 2 Galblast, Thoughtseize, Springleaf Drum, and a Bolt Scourge, thinking that I could probably interact with your deck in such a way that if I could slow it down or get myself in a position where I could put some threats and interact, I'd probably get there.
Yeah.
But your Multi 4 was quite surprising, so that was a very tough spot for you to get out of. But
that was possibly one of the most intense games I've ever had. I was on a mulligan to 4, and I kept a hand of Kataki War's Wage, P.A. Kiran Nalar, Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, and a single fetch land. I managed to top deck a second land, so I could keep myself in the game. His Thoughtseize took away my Kataki, but I managed to somehow pull literally everything out of the rear end and came away with the win. So I'm currently sitting at 2-0, Brendan is sitting at 1-1, and we'll see how the rest of the day progresses. Okay, so as you saw, we're about to get started with round 3, but I'm currently sitting at 2-0. I pulled out the absolute luckiest game that I've ever had against Affinity, so hopefully things keep up like this. It's going to be a great day if it does. Keep in touch. Alright guys, so round 3 is just finished up, for me at least. Unfortunately, I played against a very poor matchup in Living End, and it didn't go well for me. I didn't actually see many of my hate cards. And the ones that I did see were eliminated straight away. So I went down in that round. I'm still 2-1. I'm still in with a shot. So hopefully we can make a top 8 and get some glory. Okay, so we just had round 4. Unfortunately, I ended up playing against Affinity in that particular matchup, and I made a bit of a misplay with one of my cards, which unfortunately cost me the game. So I'm sitting at 2-2 right now. That means I'm going to be out of contention for the top 8, but we are still going to keep playing because I might be able to get some prizes out of this. So let's all hope it goes well, right? Alright, so we ended up losing that one against possibly one of our worst ever matchups, Infect. Unfortunately, that means we're out of contention for anything, so we're going to go home. So, if you liked what you saw today, like, share, subscribe, send it around the world, because I want to see a whole bunch of people checking this stuff out. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun, and if you do have any questions about the deck list that I ran today, feel free to send me a message. But with all that being said, I'm Rob from Rob and Loz. We'll see you in the next video.